Thank you very much. I think we have everybody online. I would like to formally welcome you all to the Joint Learning Initiative on Faith and Local Communities GBV Hub Gender-Based Violence Hub webinar on engaging faith leaders to effectively address harmful traditional practices. I'm super honoured to be facilitating this webinar in partnership with Natalia. So I am the manager of the Sexual Violence Research Initiative. It's a global program that aims to use evidence to improve responses and prevent violence against women and violence against children in low and middle income countries. And my colleague Natalia will introduce herself in a little bit, as well as Stacey Nam from the JLI Hub. First of all, I just want to give you a brief overview of the webinar today. So we're going to spend a little bit of time just introducing you to the JLI GBV Learning Hub and the harmful traditional practice studies. And then I'm going to introduce our really wonderful speakers. And then we're going to have about 20-30 minutes or so presentation from the researchers, which we then will open up for questions. However, in the meantime, you're super welcome in the chat box to write any questions. My colleague Stacey will be taking note of them, and we'll feed them back to the presenters. So if you have any amazing thoughts or ideas whilst the presentations are going on, you are very welcome to note down the questions. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Stacey Nam and Natalia Lester-Bush from the JLI. Stacey's going to run through the technology we are using today for the webinar, and Natalia will briefly introduce you to the GBV Hub. Thank you.
Thanks, Liz. And hi, everyone. If we haven't met before, my name is Stacey. I'm the Knowledge Manager here at the Joint Learning Initiative on Faith and Local Communities. And thanks to everyone who's joined, as well as anyone who's in the JLI network already. I just wanted to first note that this webinar is being recorded, so if you don't want to be recorded, if you'll just keep your microphone muted. We will also be sharing this webinar recording on the JLI website, as well as through our social media platforms after it's done, as well as we'll send a quick email just so that you have the recording as well. So just a few pointers about the Zoom technology. If you move your mouse over the screen, you'll see that on the bottom of the screen you can chat with everyone, as well as see all the participants in this webinar. On the participant window, you'll also see that there are some options to let the speakers know to speak slower or go faster, or even raise your hand. And so for most of the webinar, we will keep everyone on mute until the discussion period. But please let us know if you do have any questions. As Liz mentioned, you can either chat to everyone or one of the speakers if you have any questions. And I'll just hand it off to Natalia, who's the coordinator for the GBV Hub.
Good afternoon and welcome to everybody. I want to say a special thank you also to those who are joining in from other hubs across the JLI network. It's really wonderful to have us all together this afternoon. As you can see on the slide, this just sort of explains to you the structure of the GBV Hub, that's the Gender-Based Learning Hub in the JLI. So it is chaired by Liz from SVRI and Diana of the World Bank, and Vina and myself manage the Hub Secretariat, so coordinate Hub activities. To give some context, the JLI GBV Hub was established in September 2014 and had 16 members when we founded. And the idea is to create a horizontal learning experience wherein we link academics and policymakers and practitioners working on these issues of faith and SGBV, with a real focus on finding strong evidence on the role of faith groups' activities and impact in this area. So the GBV Hub is a really collaborative space to share learning and undertake research into the role of faith, of which this HTB study is an example. And there are other examples of work which we've undertaken on the JLI GBV Hub webpage, which we'll be showing you the link to later. So I really would encourage you to have a look on that. On the GBV Hub webpage, there also is a link to the study resources. So the wonderful speakers are going to apprise you of the details of the HTB study shortly, But after the webinar, if you'd like to access the documents in the study, there is a specific study page wherein you can find the comprehensive literature review, the full report, the 3 policy briefs into which they will speak today, and also a very thorough bibliography and the case studies for all of the institutions. So it really is well worth a look. And I will hand back over to Liz.
Thank you so much, Stacey and Natalia. Certainly have a better idea about Zoom and of course the GBV Hub, which is a really awesome resource. So please really do encourage you to go take a look. And if you aren't a member, please join. We really want to hear about your work and what you're doing. So let's get to the real reason we're here today. We really want to hear about the recently completed UK Department for International Development supported project working effectively with faith leaders to challenge harmful traditional practices. And we have 2 really wonderful speakers with us today, Dr. Lisa Roux from Stellenbosch University and Dr. Brenda Bartelink from the University of Groningen, the Netherlands. I apologize to everybody from the university for my terrible pronunciation. So first of all, let me just introduce Lisa, Dr. Roux. Dr. Roux, Lisa, is the Research Director at the Unit for Religion and Development Research, an interdisciplinary research unit at Stellenbosch University based in South Africa. She is a faith and development expert with a particular focus on sexual and gender-based violence. Having conducted research in countries across the world, her work includes the study of faith community responses to developmental issues in conflict-affected settings, patriarchy within faith communities, and interfaith peace and conflict. And Dr. Brenda Bartelink is an anthropologist and scholar in the academic study of religion at the University of Groningen, the Netherlands. Apologies again. She is specialized in religion and development, health and well-being, and gender and sexuality. As a former advisor and coordinator of the Knowledge Center Religion and Development, and a convener of the research cluster Religion and Development at the Center for Religion, Conflict and Globalization, she cross-cuts the worlds of civil society, policy and research. So we're super honored to have such great speakers today. And I don't want to take up any more time, so I'm going to pass over to Lisa and Brenda to present the findings of the study. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Liz. This is Lisa speaking, and I am in the process of sharing my screen. Is it happening? I am sorry, people, and display settings. Okay, I am seriously hoping this is working at the moment. So thank you so much for joining today and to be part of this discussion of the research that we've been conducting over the past year. So the way Brenda and I will do it, I will start by briefly explaining the methodology that we used. Then Brenda will give you an overview of the literature review that was done as the entry point into the study. And then I will talk again about the key findings from the study as a whole. So now, in response to a DFID call for proposals, JLI, the GBV Hub, put together a consortium of practitioners and academics who put together a research proposal. Myself led on this project with Brenda's co-lead, and we were assisted by our colleagues at the Unit for Religion and Development Research, my unit, and the Center for Religion, Conflict and Globalization, Brenda's. Then various members of the JLI GBV Hub assisted in reviewing the research protocols and reports, while the FBO members of the consortium offered their organizations as potential case study settings. Now, a literature review focusing on HTPs in relation to faith was the starting point of our project. This was followed by 5 case studies, which was the main thrust of the research, and lastly, we did an online survey. So as Brenda will explain, based on the lit review, selection criteria and a questionnaire were designed to identify the focus and organizations for the 5 case studies. Selection questionnaire was sent to 10 possible organizations, and then drawing on the lit review and the completed questionnaire, 5 organizations were selected, and these were Christian Aid, Islamic Relief Worldwide, Tearfund, World Vision International, and Abad. Then 4 HDPs that the case studies would focus on were selected, again based on the organizations and on the lit review, and these were female genital mutilation and cutting, child and early marriage, honor-related violence, and son preference. Then the case studies really was kind of the bulk of our focus, especially of our empirical work, and they were conducted using a combination of document review and in-depth interviews. And the short online survey was meant to complement and broaden the info that we gathered through the case studies, and it was distributed via 4 international networks and completed by 65 persons working on HTPs and or faith. And I'm going to hand over to Brenda now, and she will take you through the literature review. Brenda.
Thank you, Lisa, and hello everyone from that city with that difficult name, Groningen. I will talk you briefly through the literature review, I think first point to make is that the literature review was really guiding our case study research. So it was not a scoping study in the sense that we mapped out everything that could have been read and analyzed on HTPs and religion, but we tried to create a basis, a literature basis for the remainder of the study to guide the empirical study. So it also means that the literature review was limited in many ways. It was, like I said, not a scoping study. It focused on literature in English language. And the focus was on HTPs and the different HTPs already mentioned by Lisa in relation to faith and faith leaders. And then I switch to the next slide. One of the first things that the literature review brought out was that HTPs is in fact a very contested concept. And I've just given you, showing you 2 quotes from different documents. A 1995 document that talks about harmful traditional practices and that has been very influential in the discourse of UN organizations of the international development field. We did see a shift in discourse in the sense that later on there was more critique on the terminology of harmful traditional practices and a stronger focus on harmful cultural practices. And then in the CEDAW document that I also quoted on the slide, we see an emphasis on harmful practices. But still we see that there's this conceptualization of tradition as well as culture as violent and problematic. And even though it is absent in the latest CEDAW definition, there's still a lot of referencing to tradition and culture as harmful. We will point out also later why this is problematic. I do want to note that in particular in more academic and less practitioner-focused research, for example, anthropology and ethnographic research, the term HTPs is not used. Also in feminist and cultural studies, and that is quite remarkable since the knowledge exists in these fields, also on culture, traditions, as well as gender and sexuality. So it is quite a problematic term. And then let me go to the next slide. What methods did we use for the literature review? Well, we reviewed the UN prevalence data also to guide our selection of particular HTPs to focus on. We used different search engines, all outlined in the report as well. And we also used the snowballing method in the sense that we read it through certain edited volumes as well as special issues from journals, and from there found other literature references that we followed up on. Like Lisa indicated, there was a focus on FGMC, child and early marriage, some preferences, and honor-related violence. And each of these terms we've also linked to the different words for religion you see on the slide in the different search engines. From that, we built an annotated bibliography, and that also guided the literature review report that we've been writing. Yeah, a point to make here also in relation to the quite problematic conceptualization of harmful traditional and harmful cultural practices is also that our literature review is biased in many ways because there are important biases in the literature that is available linking harmful traditional practices to faith. And I will go to the slide you're all seeing now because I think an example of FGMC also gives an illustration why these biases exist. Because what we saw in the literature review, there's actually there's a lot, most literature we found on HTPs actually are on FGMC. And if we looked for the link with religion, then generally the link with Islam came up. Whereas we have been looking in other types of literature and academic discussions on this. And we also found that the linking FGMC to Islam and to seeing it as an Islamic practice is in fact highly problematic. We have quoted different studies, for example, a study in Burkina Faso looking at Christianity, Islam and traditional religions, where survey data didn't show any differences in the practice across these different religions. We have also looked at, again, anthropological studies that explain FGMC as a practice in the context of a much broader and complex entanglement of factors, so as ethnicity, gender, marriageability, virginity, generation, class, economic status, and faith. To continue with FGMC in the context of faith, it's assumed to be faith related, but in fact hard to determine. Of course, we also found indication of faith arguments being used to legitimize FGMC, and also that faith leaders can play an influential role in either legitimizing or correcting it. What we also found is that we actually have to understand it in the context of also broader political developments, colonialism, post-colonialism. And there was quite little to find on particular interventions that engaged religious leaders, although we found some literature on community-based interventions in which religious leaders were also involved as community actors. Going to the next slides. Child and early marriage in the context of faith. Also there we didn't find a clear relation between early marriage and faith. And we also found that when faith arguments were given to support child and early marriage, this often emerged as a response to either colonialism or Christian missions, which are of course also very much entangled. In the context, in Muslim settings, there's also a discussion going on about how Islam as a religion as well as a culture, and how within these particular contexts, child and early marriage may be legitimized or rejected. Again, interventions focused mainly on community leaders, and sometimes religious leaders or faith leaders were mentioned as part of that. I'm conscious of my time, so going to the next slide on some references. We actually found little reference to faith and more discussed in relation to culture, patriarchy, and these kind of topics. There were a few ethical studies that engaged with Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, which is remarkable because in the literature you actually find quite a dominant focus on the context of India. So that would kind of come with the assumption that there would be literature also on the relation with Hinduism. Apologies for that. Moving to the next slide, honor-related violence was discussed as part also of a broader structure of patriarchy and gender inequality. And when links with religion were mentioned, then this focused usually on Islam. And there were both interpretations that condemn as well as legitimize honor-related violence. Then we found one example on the Center of Islamic and Middle Eastern Law that actually engaged faith leaders in working on or against honor-related violence. Well, to sum up, the lit review on HTPs in the context of faith have made clear that interrelations between HTPs and faith are actually complex, multifaceted, and very much contested as well. we had some studies available on engagements of faith leaders, also talking about success in doing that, but it was not always clear how these engagements had become successful, and how and broader evaluation and more longitudinal studies were lacking. We end with this quote from Longman and Bradley, who have edited, I think, a very important volume on harmful cultural practices, where they conclude that culture and religion have to be placed alongside gender, age, race, class as the key factors in an analytical web, which shapes persons' position in identity and experiences in relation to harmful cultural practices. Let me round off with that, because we will link back to some of the issues raised in the literature review in the case study presentations as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Brenda. So I'm going to give you an overview of the key findings now. I just want to emphasize there really is lots of reports for you to go and read. So for each of the 5 case study organizations, there's a standalone report detailing that case study. We have the report for the online survey. We have Brenda's literature review plus the annotated bibliography. We have the 3 policy briefs, and then we have the big synthesis report. So the synthesis report is the 5 key findings that I'll emphasize now, is really from that, looking at all of the data sets that we produced and used for this study. But I do want to encourage you to go and take a look at all the different reports and policy briefs. So the first key finding, Brenda already touched on, and this is the issue of terminology. One of our policy briefs entitled, What's the Harm in Harmful Traditional Practices, focuses on this issue, so please do go and read it for more detail. So the problematic nature of the term that this study was supposed to focus on, harmful traditional practices, it was really one of the first challenges that we came up against in conducting this study. And throughout, this was an issue that kept coming up. Suffice it to say, we see that in practice, when people are actually working in communities, none of the case study organizations use the term. On the contrary, it creates resistance and hinders their work if they do so. Rather, they prefer an integrated approach, which addresses all of the varied factors, such as gender constructs, poverty, patriarchy, that lead to HDPs. Also, they don't address HDPs in isolation, but as part of broader programming. So we very rarely see anyone working on FGMC. It would be part of GBV programming or child protection. Terms such as harmful traditional practices or harmful cultural practices enforce a simplistic vilification of culture and tradition, where it identifies tradition or culture as the culprit. Yet research keeps on showing us that these harmful practices are driven by a number of intersecting factors. This in turn contributes to how the term enforces colonialist discourse, especially this use of the term traditional or cultural, as it was first introduced by the UN, leads to these harmful practices automatically being juxtaposed with the modern. And then the implication is that these harmful practices will disappear if the society is just properly modernized. And unfortunately, these misperceptions are supported by the fact that there's an almost exclusive focus on non-Western HDPs. Second, or another problematic issue with these terms is that they hide the gendered nature of the practices and violence. So the forms of violence that are most commonly described as HDPs affect more women and girls and are an expression of the inequality and the lack of agency and decision-making over their own lives. But we see that this focus on women and girls is not properly acknowledged in the term itself, and it hides the gendered nature of the violence and of the practices that are being discussed. And then lastly, and Brenda also touched on this, these terms have certain biases around religion that are really problematic. So in short, when they're linked with religion, the literature shows us that the focus tends to be predominantly on Islam, with additional interest in Christianity. And furthermore, Islam and Christianity tend to be represented really differently, with a decidedly more negative spin on Islam in relation to these practices. So second key issue is around the role of faith and faith communities and faith leaders in relation to HTPs. All 5 organizations that were part of the case studies identify religion as a contributing factor to HTPs, but not the causal factor. In other words, while these organizations acknowledge the role religion plays in the legitimization of HTPs, they do not consider it the main or sole reason why HTPs persist. Instead, the case study suggests that the organizations see in this continued perpetration and support of HTP at play like a complex entanglement of religion and culture, with religion used in various ways to justify cultural beliefs and practices. So it's kind of, while we see the case study organizations recognize the multiple drivers of HTPs, it seems that they prioritize faith and culture. And based on this understanding that faith that's not influenced by culture would then not drive HTPs. This is a fairly simplistic understanding, I think, of the dynamic between religion and culture, and where it's like a simplistic vilification of culture. Scholarly literature shows us that HTPs are due to an interplay between multiple drivers. And that includes faith and culture, but also ethnicity, gender, race, and class. In addition, the case studies also indicate that HTPs are not only the result of what is seen as a mistaken conflation of culture and religion, but they also continue because some faith leaders consider silence as a safer or easier options. The study findings show that people are at times aware that their particular faith does not condone or demand that a certain harmful practice be practiced, yet they continue it all the same due to the need to conform to cultural societal expectations. So there is that dynamic. But nevertheless, the 4 FBOs included in this study, 4 of the 5 organizations were faith-based, 1 was non-faith. The 4 FBOs all prioritize working with faith communities, as they see faith communities as spaces where beliefs, behaviors, and social norms, both positive and negative ones, are created and reinforced and can be challenged. So the FBOs emphasize that to engage with faith communities, one has to work through faith leaders. All 5 organizations, including the non-faith one, work directly with faith leaders on HTPs, as they recognize these individuals as crucial gatekeepers. But again, we have to recognize that they work with these faith leaders not only to utilize their influence for good, but also to understand and counter their existing negative gender practices. Then if we move on to the third one, so around effective approaches when working with faith leaders. So one of our policy briefs focuses on this in more detail. It's entitled Sleeping Giants, Mobilizing Faith Leaders as Agents of Change. So please go and read it. But to a brief overview, the 2 approaches that stood out as critically important and effective in working with faith leaders on HTPs is a public health approach and a theological approach. So it's important to share public health information pertaining to HTPs because many faith leaders lack the basic sexual and reproductive health knowledge relevant to HTPs. So raising awareness of the health consequences of HTPs creates a shared concern with the health and well-being of women and girls, and then opens up space for conversation and reflection. But it was emphasized again and again that public health information by itself is never enough. It's just an entry point or an element of an intervention. The 4 FBOs included in the study always combine public health information with a scriptural or theological approach to harmful practices. This allows these organizations to engage faith leaders in a discourse and a framework that they understand and respect as authoritative. And then in the process of such theological engagement, sacred scriptures are used to rethink and re-envision certain practices in terms of the equality of God's creation. So in this way, we see sacred scripture can be a powerful and even indispensable tool in challenging and transforming unequal and unjust structures and practices. Aside from these two key approaches, the study also found the importance of addressing HTPs holistically, because the drivers are multiple and interrelated, the importance of engaging faith leaders in a constructive and positive way, so focusing on their potentially positive roles and not on their existing negative ones, and the importance of engaging with all levels of the faith hierarchy, so working top down, yes, but also bottom up. So if we look at really practical approaches, so what do you do at grassroots level? It was really striking to notice how each case study organization, in their unique way, was using small discussion groups to address HTPs. They do this because, given the sensitive nature of the subject matter, this was seen as the only space where it could effectively be done. Public campaigns, for example, were seen by many as a complete no-no. So these small discussion groups where the same people meet repeatedly were reported as an effective way of engaging with faith leaders on HTPs. The groups can be formally structured and with a set curriculum and training, or it can be informal, requiring only a skilled facilitator. The group should be safe spaces created with sensitivity to the power dynamics within the group, should only include people who volunteer, who want to be there, use sensitive language and terminology, and facilitate with skill and patience, with a primary goal of building trust. Then lastly, we have a policy brief focusing on this issue of how to partner with faith. And it's called Amplifying Development, Partnering with Faith. So again, short overview, this is the idea of how non-faith actors can partner with faith and faith groups and faith institutions and faith leaders. But it's also about how faith actors can partner with itself. So interfaith partnership, not necessarily between different faith groups, but even just between different institutions or of the same faith. While engaging with faith leaders and faith communities on HTPs should be a component of HTP response. All 5 organizations call for and practice doing so within a broader community-based approach. They all found that an exclusive focus on faith and faith leaders can create division within communities. So they all partner with various organizations and individuals on a number of social issues. They also emphasize that there are a range of potential interlocutors. So yes, work with faith leaders, but not only faith leaders. Think about traditional cultural leaders, women and youth, survivors and those affected, local health experts, and just people who volunteer. So the ideal person would be someone who embodies multiple identities. So for example, a female health expert who's also a survivor and volunteers to participate in activities on HTPs. Because with the authority and experience and knowledge and drive that comes from these multiple identities, she becomes a very effective and influential interlocutor. So I again invite you to go and read all of those reports or even just the policy briefs. And yes, thank you for the opportunity to tell you a bit more about it.
Thank you so much, Lisa. I'm sure if we were all off mute, there would be a big, loud applause going on right now. So thank you so much. First of all, before we come to comments and questions, I really want to congratulate both yourself and Brenda for what an amazing piece of research, particularly with the very limited resources and time that you had available, but you did it with great passion and commitment. So thank you for that, because I think it does really help us highlight some of the gaps and the needs that we need to start thinking about as the JLI in addressing some of these. First of all, what I think you've really highlighted is that there is a real imbalance in the literature, which hopefully the JLI and other agencies like the JLI will start to become play a big role in starting to address. But of course, you've spoken, both Brenda and Lisa have spoken about the complexities of the issues, starting with terminology, how we speak about these issues. But within this complexity and messiness, you've highlighted some pockets of excellence of work that's being done with communities and faith addressing harmful practices that impact on women and girls in our communities. And that the importance of working with the faith sector with respect and as partners rather than as tokens. I would like to really hand over to the audience. We have a number of colleagues in the we have like many participants online with us today, and I'm sure you have some incredible experiences of working with faith leaders on harmful practices. And I'd just like to ask you yourselves if there are any lessons or experiences you'd like to share with us that we can learn from you, and then to reflect on the study that Lisa and Brenda have presented and the findings that have been shared today. So I'd like to hand over to all of you. Is there anybody that has any questions? You are welcome to unmute yourself now. Whilst we're away, hi, yeah.
My name is Tigist from Tearfund, Tearfund, Ethiopia. I'm very happy and blessed to join for this webinar. Thank you for Anita. She's sending me for the websites. I couldn't join before, and I'm very happy for that. And the presentation also very successful. And Tearfund Ethiopia also working with faith leaders. We call them for religious leaders and influential figures. And we believe that working with them is the best strategy to be minimizing for harmful traditional practice and even to minimize for all types of child protection issues. And the best thing what I get from this, I already learned most of the things, and the approach is very fantastic. But I have one question regarding to the approach. There are two approaches. What is presented by the presenter? It is a public health approach and theological approach, I think. And the public health approach, it is very fantastic, and the religious leaders or the faith leaders should have a lack of the basic knowledge of sexual and reproductive health, and they have to know about the harmful traditional practice and the issue. That's fantastic. But could you please some elaboration about the theological approach or the scriptural approach? I have some confusion on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the question. Lisa, Brenda, before I hand back to you, there's a question from Leanne as well. Leanne, would you like to ask your question as well? Leanne, I'm not able to hear you. Would you be happy to write your question in the chat? I can hear something going on.
Yes.
There you are.
I just wanted to say I apologize. That was actually an applause sign when the speakers ended, and I later couldn't figure out how to turn it off. So I was just applauding the speakers at the end of their time. So,
well, thank you for the applause, Lee. Fantastic, no problem. You're welcome to ask a question if you have one. If not, I will hand back to Lisa and Brenda.
Brenda, I'll respond, and then if you want to add, Leanne, thank you for the applause. So thank you for the question on the theological approach. So what we mean by that is what we see is that all of these the four faith-based organizations have some kind of way that they engage on the issue with Scripture. So for example, around FGMC, they would facilitate these conversations around, okay, so you are saying that this practice is demanded by your faith. What can you give me this scripture? And people would say a specific verse in the Bible or a specific hadith, and they would engage around this. So a big part of such theological engagement is that you actually need to be a theologian. This is not something that you can just wing it. So what we see with many of the organizations is that they've really put in a lot of effort into the material that they have around engaging with scripture on the issues, to debunk certain misrepresentations of from the Quran or from the Bible, and to offer counter interpretations or reinterpretations of these texts. So that's what I mean about theological engagement. Just maybe one more thing to add. A big thing of such engagement is that it's and I might have now been using the wrong language, it's not an argument, it's not a counter argument, but to really engage in conversation. People are so defensive and sensitive about how they understand their faith and their sacred texts that it's a skill. So it's not only a skill to have the scriptural knowledge and theological ability, but to facilitate these conversations. So yes, Brenda, is there something that you want to add to that, please?
Thank you, Lisa. Yeah, well, I think you've already pointed out the most important. I think what I want to add is that there's very interesting balance that faith-based organizations try to strike when it comes to engaging with the scriptures and with theology, but not engaging in theological arguments. So builds a bit on what you've been saying, Lisa, as well. So it's about, for example, general principles and values from the particular faith traditions that have to do with integrity, with not harming anyone, these kind of things, and embedding that into a faith context where even if you go and discuss, for example, the sexual and reproductive health consequences of certain practices, you can go back to these general principles of not harming people, just as an example. So I think, I agree with Lisa also that we saw that this is really, it requires knowledge as well as skill to engage with religious leaders in this way.
Thank you so much, Brenda and Lisa, for those responses. We have a few more questions coming up on the chat. From Olule from Nigeria, there's a question around how do we start up a group like this in Nigeria? I'm assuming you're asking how would you start some groups in Nigeria with faith leaders to address issues, harmful practices like FGM, early marriage, for example. If not, please get online and clarify. Then we've got a question from Tom, and about two really great questions as well. Are the small groups mixed gender, or are they separate in terms? Do they target specifically men and women? And secondly, are there any longitudinal studies in the area? I think that was highlighted that they probably aren't. And then from Steffi, what is the desired impact of engaging with faith leaders around these texts and perhaps changing the way that they interpret them for the community or individually with people, or mentioning them in talks, for example? All great questions. So they are in the chats, Lisa and Brenda, if you want to read them, but I'm going to hand back to you. So there are 3 additional questions.
Brenda, do you want to go first or I go first? I don't want to steal all the fun questions.
Please go ahead, Lisa.
Oh, okay. So how do you start such groups in your specific context in Nigeria now? Well, I would suggest go and read some of even just in the synthesis report, but in the case study reports, there are some really interesting, just to see how other organizations have done it. But if I'm drawing from an example of, I think it's Islamic Relief in Ethiopia, and if I think about Tearfund in Tanzania, where they started first with discussion groups with interested faith leaders around issues in the community that they think need addressing. So they would not say, we are bringing people together, let's talk about FGMC or child and early marriage, but we are concerned citizens almost. And because you're saying how to start such groups, it really is about just creating that safe space. And the challenging thing, if I think about what Islamic Relief did in Ethiopia and Tearfund's work in Tanzania, these are just two examples, is they're not going in with a set curriculum and a training that they can control. They're really going in with, well, we're hoping that these will be some of the topics that we can, cover and touch on, but we are in this to create relationships and safe spaces for these relationships to discuss difficult issues in the community. So you don't have that absolute control, and now we're addressing FGMC, but I honestly think that's where the power of the approach comes from, that there's a feeling for local faith leaders that an issue is not being forced on them, but identified by them themselves. And then, I mean, the usual things of good facilitation about how to manage a group and create a safe space. I think that's what I would say in short on that. And Brenda, if you want to add later. Tom, what we would see is not mixed gender groups, although here and there they're oh, sorry, I saw the note. Here and there are some mixed gender groups, but they're the absolute exception. A big thing is to have single gender groups so that people can speak openly and honestly, especially within very conservative communities. And as always, our longitudinal studies are missing. And that's what we're continuously encouraging organizations to really not just implement interventions, but track interventions. And please see Selena Palm's note here on the GIADOR groups in Nigeria. Maybe, Brenda, if I pass over to you to just respond to those two questions, anything that you want to add?
Yeah, Lisa, thank you. I wanted to add on the mixed gender, the question on mixed gender, because indeed these small community groups, in order to create safe spaces, you have to be really careful and aware of power imbalances, including different gender differences. So it's very important to not work only with mixed gender groups. At the same time, what we saw when addressing faith leaders in a phase usually before it rolls out into communities, because formal faith leaders are often men, it is actually important to see how these groups can be more mixed. So also bringing the experience of being a woman into the conversation. And that is sometimes done by not focusing only on the formal religious leaders, but also on other leadership roles in the faith communities, or perhaps by also inviting women's leaders, for example. So there, I think we have come across some examples where it is actually beneficial to have mixed genders. And that's it.
Thanks both Lisa and Brenda. I think Steffi has a follow-up question, or did I just interrupt you, Lisa?
There was this question, but Steffi, you asked the first one that I didn't respond to, that we haven't responded to yet. What is the desired impact of engaging with the faith leaders around the text? And then I see your second one. I'll go into that as well. I would be hesitant to say that the goal of theological engagement is to change how faith leaders work, think about these issues. I mean, I guess secretly in a programmatic frame of mind, yes, we want them to start opposing child and early marriage, but it really is not just about changing their thinking about a specific issue in their theological engagement, but if we think bigger pictures around how they engage theologically. If we think so many of our faith leaders that are really influential have very little theological training whatsoever. So it's to change, I think, how certain texts are interpreted in ways that are conducive to violence. But it's also, I think, to help faith leaders in seeing their role in in addressing this practice in their community. So it's not just about changing their own thinking or engaging with their own thinking, but how do they then engage this thinking in their community? And then your follow-up question, I have to say so Steffi has this question about if we just have a small group discussion where the community have to bring up these issues, do they really bring up such sensitive issues? I have to say I've been astounded in the organizational documents that I reviewed and the conversations that I had about this is how the issues are raised. If this is a safe space and you can genuinely engage with people about what is problematic, these issues are raised. But, and this connects with what Brenda says, if you're just talking to top-level male faith leaders, for example, FGMC is often not raised because it's seen as a women's issue that's never been interrogated. So it does depend on who's in your group and the issues that are even on their radar. So there's some thinking around it. And with some of the groups, what I've seen is that some people do, in some of the groups, the facilitator also introduces issues. It's not just only we go with what the group introduces. Brenda, do you want to add anything to that, please?
Yeah, I think there the public health approach that we mentioned came in as an interesting thing because maybe not, what we saw is that organizations do not raise issues of FGMC, but then they, from a public health perspective, can talk about the health consequences of certain practices. And then, this would be a more gentle way of bringing in these sensitive issues and questions. So just sharing health knowledge, sharing knowledge about women's bodies, for example, can already bring this kind of revelation or this idea of okay, then we have to discuss what actually certain practices do to women. So that's also why we included it as not the only thing that is focused on, but definitely a very productive way of engaging in communication, because concerns with health of people is generally shared by different type of actors, including religious leaders.
Thanks so much, Brenda. I just would like to get back to Siyabulela, who's been amazingly patient and has a question, and then Selena wants to share some experiences from the work done by Christian Aid in Nigeria, talking about gender and age groups. So Siyabulela, I'm going to call on you to ask your question.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Just by show of hand, could you just if I'm visible, can you just someone type if I'm visible on the group chat? If I'm audible, sorry.
You are absolutely audible. We can hear you.
Perfect.
Thanks.
Now, my question is that given that the faith communities have taken a center stage in development discourses around the world, and we're coming as a society, we're becoming more. We're realizing that the faith community is a very integral part in development, and many issues are being raised within such spaces. Now the question then becomes, how do we then ensure that, or in a context where there are a lot of issues that are being brought to the faith community to be addressed from a faith community perspective, how then do we ensure that issues around harmful traditional practices or harmful cultural practices become relevant and become on top of the pile of all these other host of issues that are being brought to faith communities?
Thanks so much, Siyabulela. Do we want to, I think actually what would be really helpful is to just answer that question and then move to Selena. And then we also have some really interesting work being done in Cambodia, and then a question from Tom.
Okay, so if we, Siabulela, thank you for your question. I think two things that I want to say in response to your question. I would say yes, faith communities and the role of faith and faith leaders within these development spaces and development issues has now, say in the last 20 years, received increasing attention and maybe recognition. But I would say it's still very little understood, and I think understood for what it is within the development space. So I think the presence of religion and religious leaders and the role of religion within this development space is still a very messy and in some ways sometimes unhelpful dynamic that's going on there. So I think I want to add that clause or caveat. How do we get HDPs to the top of the pile? Honestly, I don't know how to respond to that. I think with my community-based approach to things, I think it's not our position to tell a community what must be on top of its pile. I think if you're really focused on community-based engagement, this is a community that should be deciding it. And I think that's also part of a broader decolonizing narrative that we want within our development spaces is, you know, who's setting the agenda. So I don't have an answer to that. I kind of have just these vague statements. Brenda, if you want to add something.
Thank you, Lisa. Yeah, I don't think I have an answer either. So I agree with you that there's always this tight balance between the kind of programmatic approach you can have as an organization, really having a desire to change things, and at the same time working with the communities and letting them be central to the whole process.
Thank you both. I have been a terrible facilitator because we are almost at the end of our time. So I'm going to ask if you would be happy for us just to continue a little bit longer, because we've got two very interesting questions and some experiences that we can share before we wrap up, if that's okay. And you are welcome to log off if you need to be somewhere. We do understand and respect that. And the recording will be up online. So I would like to invite the colleagues from Cambodia to talk about their longitudinal study with children, which sounds super interesting. And then Tom has a question. And then we might need to start wrapping up and handing over to Natalia, as well as there's some work coming out of from Emma from 28 Too Many. So fantastic discussion. I'm going to hand back to Lisa and Brenda. Oh, sorry, I'm going to hand over to the Cambodia colleague. Sorry, I didn't catch your name.
It's Glenn Miles.
Oh, hi, Glenn. Lovely. Please. Looking forward to hearing it.
This is a really interesting project that's been going on for about 8 years now. It's called the Butterfly Project, and it's with sexually exploited survivors of trafficking and sexual exploitation. And so now some of them are quite a bit older. They're not children any longer. And so it's been really interesting. I've been compiling some of the information about their experiences of faith. And I've actually went in with it quite just, really a little bit skeptical and a bit concerned that some of the Christian organizations that they were working, that they were in part of, may have been a little bit heavy and hard on them. But in fact, what I found is that nearly all of them had a very positive experience. And we made a particular point of asking them whether they felt forced in any way, and they haven't. So that's really encouraging. But a number of them did say that they have been, they continue to they believe that it's important for them to continue in what they see as their national religion, their traditional religion, which is Buddhism, and so they continue to go to the temple and so on. But it's interesting because there really has been very little, if any, dialogue with the Buddhist leaders. Even trying to work with the pastors in churches has been challenging, and some of them really don't know what to do. You know, they're just completely at a loss when it comes to supporting these survivors once they move back into their community. But I would, you know, this has been inspiring me to think about how we might engage with some of the local monks as well. Also, of interest to the group is that there were a number of participants who talked about going to the local witch doctor, and some of that was, well, it seemed quite harmful to me. For example, one witch doctor was actually sexually abusing them. So these are things which, you know, that are of concern. But you know, certainly we're trying to be neutral in listening to what they have to say, and then and so on.
Thanks, Glenn. That's, I mean, incredibly interesting study. And if you've got a link, please do share it on the chat group with us. And really interesting, and complexities of doing research on the ground around, you know, hearing these hard stories, how to avoid collusion while retaining people who can make a difference in the community. So I think another particularly important issue that maybe the Hub can take on board and try to address, or have another webinar, I think, because there's been so much discussion. Tom, you had a question around backlash in communities as a result of challenging harmful practices. So back to you, Lisa and Brenda. Do you want to just quickly comment, respond to Glenn and to Tom's questions? And then there's been a number of other comments, but I think we might have to start wrapping up.
I think I'll respond to that quickly, and then I want to just grab the gap and to add one more thing. So and Brenda, feel free to add something. I can't remember a specific example of where programming failed because of backlash or something like that. But in the discussion of programming, the big thing that's constantly being heard, if a community is almost approached in the wrong way, or is, well, why are you bringing these Western ideas? So that is really a genuine, so it's the sensitivity of how the programming needs to be designed and implemented cannot be overemphasized, because otherwise it's just this wall of, well, Western ideas and you don't understand us, and that idea of these Western ideas, your Western human rights ideas, came up repeatedly. And then I just kind of want to grab the gap to just say what the study has really shown is the importance of sharing knowledge from our programming. I've been doing work in this field for a long time now, and this is the first study where we've had 5 international organizations actually sharing their documentation and their best practices and some of their failures. We're very, and for a small study, the stuff that we could learn just by seeing it in so many different settings, it's so valuable. And I just want to emphasize, please, we need to start sharing, you know, our successes and seriously our failures as well, because otherwise we just keep on making the same mistakes. But Brenda, did you want to respond?
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. I want to point out one, there were a couple of examples, I think, in the literature review, but one article in particular by 2 anthropologists, Osterbo and Osterbo, who studied FGMC programming, engaging religious leaders in the context of Ethiopia, and actually observed a serious backlash where faith leaders from one particular area and faith leaders from surrounding region, also from different kind of how do you say, more conservative or more progressive positions, actually end up in a huge conflict. So it's a very interesting article where they analyze what happens also in a local context and in communities when certain interventions are introduced, and also problematize the way that this is sometimes done. And it really also brings us back to the the question of what is the impact of a particular intervention, not only with regard to raising awareness on HTPs, but also in the local power dynamics between various actors and in the local communities context. So you find a reference as well to that article in the annotated bibliography and in the literature review. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Brenda and Lisa. Again, big, fantastic round of applause. You're all welcome to raise your hands as a raise of applause, as a hand clapping gesture at this stage. What seems to be in the chats and the comments and from the floor is the real desire, the need to bring people together to talk about these issues, to share program lessons and learnings, to share the successes and to share the failures, so we can continue to move together to really address these really complex issues that are happening in our communities. I think that's a really important segue to hand over to Natalia, who's just going to talk a little bit about the JLI GBV Hub, around how you can join and share your materials and resources with us. And also, I believe that Emma also highlighted ways of sharing information on FGM and FGMC as well. So over to you, Natalia.
Thank you, Liz, and thank you so very much, Lisa and Brenda, for such an informative presentation, and just you guys for sharing such wonderfully thoughtful questions. It's really been helpful seeing in the group chat and engaging with this more and having the shared resources. Stacey has shared the link in the group chat to just encourage people to continue sharing their resources, and I'll ensure that I put in some of ours from Tearfund as well. I would also like to thank Selena Palm, who's online, who's been listening into this webinar, because she was also one of the researchers on this piece. I think it's great having this webinar as an example, just in looking at the chat and then listening and hearing the questions, of the richness and value of the JLI, that actually, because it's so collaborative and it's about sharing learning and moving this work forward and sharing, as Lisa said, the challenges as well as the successes that we can plan forward. So it's just so important to have more members. So that's my plug to say, if you're not already a member of the JLI GBV Hub, please do join. We will be convening soon, so you'll be getting information about how you can get involved. And on this slide of the hub where it says user registration, it just gives you some more information as to what that registration entails, what the hub does, and how you can get involved, how low key it is, but also how enriching. So we'd really welcome you to join that. There also are 3 other hubs which are shortly going to be commencing their scoping studies, and they're on similarly relevant themes on ending violence against children, refugees and migration, and anti-human trafficking. So if you'd be interested in further information or in joining any of those, you're very welcome to have a look at the link which Stacey has just shared again in the chat, and which is also on the final page, along with Stacey and myself, are details if you have any inquiries about JLI, specifically the GBV Hub, or others, please direct to Stacey. And if you did have any questions of the researchers, you're welcome to email them in their links below. If any of you are going to CSW, that's the Commission on the Status of Women, in March, then we are actually having a panel presentation there on this research. So we're very fortunate to have Lisa and Brenda and Selena all presenting this work, and then also going to have 2 further panels to discuss it and critique it and try and push in more. So if you are going to CSW in March, then our event is on Monday the 19th at 10 a.m. So please do drop me a line and I can give you more information on that. And I look forward to further conversations with you all in due course. Thank you so very much. Back to Liz to close.
Well, thank you so much, Natalia. First of all, I'd really just like to thank you all. You've been such great participants. It's been a really wonderful and deep, rich discussion. And thank you for sharing the last hour with us discussing this really important issue. And again, just please do join the Hub. It's a really fantastic resource for us all, and it's only as successful as the people who participate in it. So we would invite you to join if you are not already a member. Finally, I'd really like to thank DFID for the foresight for funding this research, and of course Lisa and Brenda for the really fantastic work, and then Stacey and Natalia for pulling this webinar together. Thank you all, and have a wonderful day, evening, afternoon, whatever time it is in the world for you. Thank you for spending the time with us.
Okay, thank you.